Hello and good evening. I'm Melisa Idris.
And I'm Sharaad Kuttan.
You're watching Consider This, the show where we want you to consider and then reconsider what you know of the news of the day. Over the weekend, 2 women had separately alleged that police officers had sexually harassed them when stopped at roadblocks. Now, one of the women said she received an unsolicited text message after the encounter, and the other said that she was asked to expose herself in order to avoid being fined. According to Bukit Aman's Integrity and Standards Compliance Department, one of the policemen had since been moved to administrative tasks while investigations are underway. Now, we contacted PDRM and also the Office of the Minister of Women, Family and Community Development, but received no commitment that no confirmation that they would come on the show. So let me introduce to you our first guest we have on the line now, women's rights activist Ivy Josiah, who was a member of the 2004 Royal Commission to enhance the operation and management of the Royal Malaysia Police. Ivy, good evening. Now, given your work with the RCI on the police, how would you describe their attitudes towards issues of gender in their policing practices? I'm wondering whether there is gender sensitivity training for police officers, for instance.
Well, most institutions will deny that there is a gender sensitivity issue within the work culture, whether it's the private or public sector, even Parliament. It took many, many years before Parliament included a standing order that said that they should not have offensive and sexist remarks. It was only in 2012. So when it came to the police, of course, not only in my experience in the RCI, but just general experience from the 80s working with the police, they were very reluctant to admit that police officers were indeed insensitive, and that they did sexually harass complainants and suspects. But I have to say that when we did give them evidence during the RCI, during the Royal Commission inquiry, we gave them evidence that suspects complained about sexual harassment, female suspects that is, complained about how they were strip searched, they were asked to just completely go naked, including taking out the underpants in front of other detainees, and migrant workers and female refugees were all even sexually assaulted. When we showed them all these cases and showed a pattern, it wasn't this one bad cop. They did admit, yes, we must have gender sensitivity training. In fact, we do. They occasionally call on the women's groups to come in and do some training, but it's one-off training. It's not sustained. And so even in our report, in the Royal Commission report, they do say, yes, we must have. But Melissa, saying is one thing and doing is another. You see, to date, we do not know whether the Inspector General standing orders, does it send out a very clear directive that police officers must conduct themselves in a professional manner, must not use the powers that they have to sexually harass the public? I mean, is it in writing? Because the IGSO in Malaysia is a confidential document. We don't know what is in there. Whereas if we go to UK or Australia or Canada, the IGSO, the standing orders are public documents. So,
Ivy, I want to ask you about this other maybe dimension of the problem that isn't about clearly what is criminal activity. I mean, if a police officer sexually assaults somebody, that's just criminal activity, right? But what about the question of how the police force, and I'm assuming it's overwhelmingly male, deals with issues of domestic violence and rape and sexual harassment in terms of how they treat women? What are the assumptions they make about women or their relationship to men?
Definitely, you're saying how they treat these complaints, right, on domestic violence and rape. But yeah, definitely. Not only during the time of in my commission, during my time with the Royal Commission, but during my time in WAO, which is well over 15, 20 years, even till to date, there will always be consistent issues around officers being insensitive. A lot has improved. I must say, during the 20 years and 30 years of my activism, from the time I started in the 80s till now, at least now they admit domestic violence is a problem. But usually they regard the complainants as somehow it's your fault. What were you wearing? That you still get those remarks. And the police officers do admit that it's an issue. At least now they're open to admitting that there is an issue. But like I said, is there a sustained gender awareness program? Is there a standing order specifically saying that they must respect the rights of women? Which we don't know.
And Ivy, without that, are you saying that without that there could be a bigger, more systemic problem at play here rather than just, a few bad apples?
Exactly. I think it's very important. It should be the IGSO. Of course, there should also be, an independent police commission, that will also balance it out. We must always, you see, when you're sexually harassed by a police officer, you are going to the police to say, please investigate yourself, right? I mean, this can be an issue. This can be a problem. And there's a perception issue that, that the police may not do a good, thorough job. Although, the director of JIPS have said they will be transparent and thorough. I think the Independent Police Commission will also help. But I firmly think a standing order. The police are very obedient when it comes to IGSOs. When you give them an IGSO, they do respect this order. So it must come from the top that they do not tolerate. They will not tolerate sexual harassment. And
okay, Ivy, do we have a problem then with what men in the force might consider sexual harassment? Whereas, clearly in the issue of the custodial rape of a 16-year-old in Miri, that was perhaps a very clear case of violating all kinds of standards, including, the question of criminality. But what about the issue of flirting at a checkpoint? Taking the number down of somebody and then saying, oh, I'd like to get to know you. Is that something that is of a cultural, sort that needs to be worked through? I mean, it's not a clear-cut violation in the minds of some men.
Absolutely. I think most men, whether they are in the police force or whether they are in other sectors too, tend to use the power that they have. I mean, we've got complaints against doctors, we've got complaints against, people in the public service. They tend to use the power that they have, and if they see a customer in front of them, in this case, a woman driver, they will tend to use the power that they have. I mean, this is not specific to the police. I think it's a male culture. Sexism is in almost every part of the world. Every part. Sexism is existing in many, many institutions, in all work cultures. So there are two levels. But when it comes to the police, one is their professional conduct. And again, you have to really unpackage what do you mean by professional conduct. Professional conduct includes non-sexist behavior. The other part is how do you treat female complainants? When a woman goes to the police station and makes a complaint, writes a complaint, of course, these days you have more female police officers who do the investigation. But even female police officers can be sexist, can be insensitive.
Ivy, thank you so much for joining us on the show tonight. We really do appreciate your insights. We're going to take a quick break here and consider this, but there's still so much to discuss on this matter, so make sure you stay tuned.
This game gets greater all.
Bila sentuh soal berita, tiada masa untuk tunggu. Kepada anda kami bawakan fakta, susulan dan kupasan yang terkini. Tiada drama dan tiada pengulangan. Usah tunggu lama-lama. AWANI 745 lebih awal dari biasa.
Kini berwajah baru.
Ini pula susulan khas pesawat Back Air di Kazakhstan. Pesawat berkenaan dilaporkan tergelincir 2 kali.
Notifikasi berita terkini dan navigasi mudah. Podcast dikemas kini dengan berita dan program.
Rebirth, Reformasi, Resistance and Hope.
serta video tanpa had dengan scroll tanpa henti. Buat turun aplikasi baru Astro AWANI sekarang.
Gagalan Kerajaan Persekutuan tunai janji melaksanakan projek baik pulih sekolah daif turut diulas Menteri Muda Pendidikan dan Penyelidikan Teknologi Dr. Anwar Rapai.
COVID-19, 2 lagi kes disyaki atau PUI direkodkan di Sarawak.
So hopefully kita akan mendapat kedudukan yang lebih baik di masa-masa akan datang.
Udang geragau atau bubuk dalam bahasa tempatan terkenal sebagai bahan utama dalam pembuatan belacan atau cencaluk.
Amanah di tangan kita. Adat, budaya dan semangat menjadi kesinambungan perpaduan tanah air yang tercinta. Berteraskan adab yang terpahat di jiwa dan raga.
Hi, you're watching Consider This. I'm Melisa Idris. With me is Sharaad Kuttan. Malaysia's attitude towards sexual harassment has come into focus once again after women took to Twitter to share experiences of being harassed by police officers at roadblocks. Nisha Sabanayagam is the Program and Operations Manager at the All Women's Action Society, or better known as AWAM. She joins us on the line now. Nisha, good evening. Women's organizations like AWAM, that's doing work on the ground, have come up to estimate that for every reported case of sexual harassment, there are 8 or 9 cases that go unreported. That is a staggering number. And, you know, we know that sexual harassment is already underreported for a range of reasons, but do you think this is more so the case as when the perpetrator of the harassment is in uniform, is a law enforcement officer?
Oh, yes, definitely. The fact that the perpetrator is a person who is a police officer or a person who is meant to protect you is definitely a reason that women feel even more fear to actually make a report. On any normal day, in a normal case where the perpetrator isn't a police officer, we get reports of we get cases where women don't go to the police, or they come to AWAM instead, or as you saw recently, they actually go on Twitter. And the fact that it's a police officer, even when the person comes to AWAM and the person tells us, okay, the perpetrator is a police officer, even for us, we take a little bit of a step and we wonder, okay, who do we talk to? Who do we go to? Thankfully, of course, AWAM has a good relationship with the D11 in Bukit Aman, so we can always, work with the people in Bukit Aman. But that's AWAM. Imagine a person on the street, who do they go to? So that's the fact that if the perpetrator is a police officer, it contributes even more to the numbers of underreporting.
Nisha, there was a conversation on social media about, police officers and whether flirting constituted sexual harassment, and there was an expression that was going around, police officers are also human. And I wonder if at least among women, there is a consensus about where those lines are, where the lines between what is acceptable levels of flirtation and what is unacceptable, and so on and so forth. Is there consensus or is there a divergence? Is there a conversation going on among women?
Okay, so first of all, when you are actually in uniform and you're on the road and your job is to basically, have roadblocks where you have the right to stop people in their car, you have to be professional. I don't think there's any excuse for flirting. And especially when you know that you are in the position of power and you flirt with somebody, if that person is uncomfortable, there's nobody around to actually stop you from continuing that flirtation. When it comes to what is the boundaries for flirtation, it's different for every woman. And people need to realize this. There's no one standard set rule as to what constitutes it's okay to flirt or not okay to flirt. And that's why it's so important to have the sexual harassment bill tabled, because the sexual harassment bill goes on the foundation that a person is considered to be sexually harassed when that person feels uncomfortable, humiliated, offended, or threatened. And when you have a law like that, it makes people a little bit more aware about their behavior and a little bit more respectful to the person that they're interacting with.
Well, I'm so glad that you brought up the sexual harassment bill, Nisha. I mean, these allegations of sexual harassment has renewed calls over the urgency of this bill. We need this law enforced. How would, if there was a sexual harassment act enforced today, how would that law protect these women who were harassed at the roadblock?
Okay, I'm so glad that you asked me that question. Well, first of all, the women do not have to go to the police to make a report against a police officer. So that just takes away that barrier, right? The second thing is that they would actually be able to go to people who understand what it is like to feel sexually harassed, people who actually deal with sexual harassment cases, people who are experts in. So they do not have to worry whether they have to prove to this person that I've been sexually harassed. And thirdly, with the sexual harassment bill comes the need of the requirement for a tribunal. And the tribunal has a specific time period where they actually have to make sure that these cases are acted upon and that justice is served. So all this removes these barriers of underreporting and also the fear of having to make a report if the perpetrator is a police officer.
Nisha, I want to ask you a broader question that goes beyond the checkpoints, and really around the question of whether you think that the police have, over the last couple of years, acted with impunity when it comes to women. Looking at the Miri case, there now seems to be action taken against, I believe, 11 police officers, but. For the longest time, we thought of the police as protecting their own, right? Of this blue wall that, that is about camaraderie among police officers. So, how much of that is true? I mean, how much do you feel as an activist that action is taken and that individual officers suffer the consequences of their actions?
Well, I think we can use the examples of a couple of cases that we've seen. For example, the police officer who was accused of allegedly raping the 2 Mongolian women. We've not seen really a closure to that case or really any form of justice being brought against the police officer. In our cases, when we deal with Awam, usually when we have cases where the police officers are perpetrators, and we do have those cases, when we take them to, for example, the D11 or Bukit Aman, action is taken against the police officer. And actually, you can see in the case where the integrity of head of Bukit Aman actually said that he would make sure that disciplinary action is taken. What we would like to see, however, that this is just not lip service. We'd like to see, when you say disciplinary action, what kind of disciplinary action are you taking? Is this person just going to be suspended? And how do you stop this trend from actually repeating? Even last year during the NCO, Awam had already had a couple of cases where authorities at police roadblocks were actually harassed people in cars. I think what we need to do is we need to look at a more sustainable solution. And one of the most sustainable solutions is to ensure that we have curriculum in the police academies that teach all these police officers what is actually sexual harassment, what they cannot do at roadblocks, where do they cross the line when it comes to actually dealing with the public, especially when the public are young, vulnerable women.
Nisha, thank you so much for joining us on the show tonight. We really do appreciate your time. We're going to be back with more on this topic, so stay tuned to Consider This.
AWANI brings you the latest stories.
Bila sentuh soal berita, tiada masa untuk tunggu. Kepada anda kami bawakan fakta, susulan dan kupasan yang terkini. Tiada drama dan tiada pengulangan. Usah tunggu lama-lama. AWANI 7.45 lebih awal dari biasa.
Kini berwajah baru.
Ini pula susulan khas pesawat back air di Kazakhstan. Pesawat berkenaan dilaporkan tergelincir 2 kali.
Notifikasi berita terkini dan navigasi mudah. Podcast dikemas kini dengan berita dan program.
Rebirth, Reformasi, Resistance and Hope.
Serta video tanpa had dengan scroll tanpa henti. Buat turun aplikasi baru Astro AWANI sekarang.
Hi, thank you so much for staying with Sharaad and I on Consider This. Let's continue our conversation about the urgency for the sexual harassment bill to be tabled after a series of incidences involving the police. Joining us on the line now, we have Chung. He's the Deputy Executive Director of the NGO Women's Aid Organization. Chung, good evening. Thank you so much for joining us on the line. What has been WAO's experience when it comes to engaging with the police force? I mean, both in your work offering shelter to women in distress, but also in your advocacy work. How has that engagement been when it comes to police attitudes towards women, towards gender sensitivity?
Yeah. I think for WAO, we have a quite different experience than the general public. The reason is we work directly with the D11 unit, which is the unit that is in charge of investigating domestic violence, sexual assault, and child abuse cases. So that unit actually is specifically trained to address these cases, and we have sort of a long-standing relationship with that particular unit. So for us, that unit, D11, is always it's quite effective and efficient, and they do their job really well in responding to any issue that we would bring to them. I think the issue here more is what the general public experiences. So that general public would sort of deal with any frontline officer, be it at the roadblock, be it at any Balai Police or any other facility. So I think the experience that WAO faces is sort of a bit different than what the general public may face.
Chung, I want to ask you precisely this, right? If you have a sort of a situation of domestic violence, and it's the patrolling car, the Kereta Ronda that comes by, those police officers, are they well equipped to understand what's going on? Do they revert to cultural expectations about, well, men and women, husbands and wives, trouble in the family should stay in the family kind of thing? Yeah.
Yeah, it's quite hard
what's happening there?
I mean, it's quite hard to generalize because, I mean, for us, there are two things, right? So we do get complaints from the public, so that by definition is already problematic cases. On the other hand, we also work directly with the D11 unit that is specifically trained to handle these issues, so then they are a bit more positive. But I think the point here is that, when we're dealing with the police force, it's important that it can't just be, in general, they're good. They all have to be good. Imagine if just one officer is sort of not trained or just is not aware, that one officer is going to be engaging, not just, of course, every case is important, but that one officer is going to be engaging in so many different interactions. So imagine...
Well, Ren, sorry to interrupt you, but Ren, when these two women came out, spoke out on Twitter about their experiences being harassed at a roadblock, it triggered conversations with other women on social media sharing their own experiences. Almost every woman seems to have had some kind of run-in or an uncomfortable experience, dealing with authorities, in this particular instance, PDRM, the police officers. I'm wondering whether, just judging from the chorus of women who've come out to say that they've experienced something similar, is this an institutional problem that we're looking at, or is this just a few bad apples?
I think we have to look at it as an institutional problem. The reason is, even if you say that only a few bad apples in PDRM, that may be true, but even a few bad apples are enough to really affect many individuals. I mean, just think of it as, how many roadblocks are there in the country? Imagine you had 100 roadblocks, and at two roadblocks there are two officers who are sexually harassing people who come by. I mean, those two officers are going to be interacting with hundreds and maybe thousands of individuals over the course of days and weeks. So we have to look at it as an institutional problem. We cannot just say, it's only 1 or 2 people. It's even a small percentage of officers who are not trained or act inappropriately, or in this case, conduct sexual harassment, is already a huge problem, and we need institutional solutions to this.
Renjun, do you think that having more women police officers would change the dynamics of the way police operate? On what would have to go specifically into the training of women, or that would make them, advocates for change within the police force?
I think it's both. I mean, I think studies have shown that adding gender diversity in various fields of work does make a difference. So that is, I think in the police force, you can think of it as, police women do experience things differently as women compared to men. They might be more sensitive and more aware of certain things. But of course, that's not enough. Even police officers of any gender needs to receive training. It needs to be at 2 levels. So one, you can think of it as every police officer needs to have basic training on sensitivity, gender sensitivity, on how to handle, how to deal with cases of sensitive nature, like sexual harassment, domestic violence, and so on. And then there's also a special training needed for a special force of police officers, which is the D11 officers who may need a different kind of training.
Ren, you talked a little bit about the need for institutional solutions. I'm thinking about the sexual harassment bill as a necessary legislation to be put in place. Is there urgency? Is there enough urgency for us to see this bill materialize into law?
I think the public's view is clear. There's been, 3 or 4 public surveys done over the past 2 years that demonstrate the urgency, that demonstrate that this is a big problem. I think the most clearest example is a study done by YouGov in 2019 that showed that 28% of Malaysians, includes 36%, so 1 of 3 women in Malaysia have experienced sexual harassment. Numerous other studies have been done, including by the government itself. So, in just judging by the response that, time and again we see cases of sexual harassment coming up into the public sphere, and the reaction that it brings from the public, starting with the, I think in the Sungai Buloh doctor incident, up till now, where we see incidents of police officers allegedly conducting sexual harassment. And the public response has been huge. This has been, top story news in top conversations, social media. So in terms of the research, in terms of the public response, there is urgency. There's so much urgency. The question really now is the government going to do anything about it, and when? We've heard the phrase. We've heard so many times, oh, it's going to be in March. It's going to be in this year, end of this year. It's going to be this and then. And until now, we haven't seen. In particular with this new government, we haven't seen much movement in terms of where we were and where we said we would be.
Right. Well, we'll have to keep pushing, that agenda. Make sure that it remains in the consciousness of the public. Thank you so much, Ren, for joining us on the show tonight. We appreciate your time. That's all we have for you on this episode of Consider This. I'm Melisa Idris.
And I'm Sharaad Kuttan, signing off for the evening.
Thank you so much for watching, and good night.
Thank you.